Hey, what's up, everybody? So it's your man, Mr. Faia, and excuse me while I have a sip of this Henny real quick. Yeah. So, any rate, man, I wanted to create a video here, just doing a comparison of the different Akai MPCs because there's some cats out there that I'm sure are wondering like what route should they take, and it's going to all just depend on a number of different factors. One being a big one, their finances, and then ultimately like what are they trying to accomplish and where do they see themselves being further on down the road as they progress with their skills as a music producer. So if you know me, I love my MPC Live Mark 1. Had it since it first came out back in 2017. It's been through it's got a lot of memories and a lot of miles, but it's been working great. And but with that being said, I went into Chatty GPT, ask it to, hey, spit out a comparison chart of all the different MPCs that's been out since the release of the MPC Live, but all the MPCs since 2017. And basically this is going to be like a more technical conversation, to inform a future purchase. So first thing to look at here, let's see. All right, so the main scope, it says here, let me go back on a couple of things here. Here we go. Yeah, so we're going to number of different things on here, like, the different models, the track counts, the IO and stuff like that. All the technical specs as far as like the processor and the memory and stuff like that. So first thing to understand too is that like the MPC Live first came out in 2017 along with the MPC X. MPC 1 came out in 2020 along with the MPC Live 2. 2022 was the Key 61. 2023 was the MPC X SE. And then 2023 was the MPC 1 Plus. 2024, you got the MPC Key 37, and then also the MPC Live 3 coming out last year in 2025, and then the XL 2026, and then also the MPC Sample came out this year. So the MPC Sample is actually going to be kind of interesting because it has like a totally different architecture compared to the other MPCs on this list. And before we go on, just so you know, like if you look down in the description on this link, make sure you like and subscribe, by the way, and leave a comment. But I'm going to leave a link so that way you can go ahead and download this, this PowerPoint file for yourself, and you can kind of like, use it to make a well-informed decision in terms of what you want to purchase. Let's see. Hardware comparisons. Now, this is a good one because we're talking about processors, right? Processor and RAM performance, right? So the first MPC Live, came out with the 1.8 quad core ARM processor. All of them on the first gen had the same processor. They all had the same amount of RAM. The internal storage, however, was different. All of them except for the MPC 1 had 16 gigs, right? Now, here's where it kind of differs a little bit. The internal SATA bay, okay? That's where you can put the 2.5-inch laptop hard drive. In my case, I got a 4 terabyte solid state drive. So the MPC Live, the Live 2, and the X all have internal storage bays for hard drive. So you can expand the hell out of these things with those models, okay? Now, the Live and the Live 2, we'll just call them Mark 1 and Mark 2 from here on out, right? Those have batteries in them, okay? And my machine, I have not replaced the battery in it yet. And like I said, it's almost 10 years old. And, it's 9 years old, and it still charges, just fine, right? MPCsamples.com offers like replacement parts, batteries, and stuff like that. So, there's parts available, if you're adventurous enough to open up, take it apart and whatnot. And if if you got questions, look at some of my previous videos. I've actually taken my MPC apart on camera. So you'll see, get an idea of what it looks like on the inside. All right. So let's see, let's move on to the 61, the MPC X SE. Once again, they got that same processor, right? But what they ended up doing is, looks like for the 61 and the XSE model, they increased the RAM to 4 gigs and the internal storage as well. You got 32 gigs and you got 48 gigs. So that 32 gigs, even on the Key 37, even though it has 2 gigs of RAM, the internal storage is at 32 gigs. Now, keep in mind, when the Key 37 and the Key 61 came out, that was when they started getting big into these virtual instrument plugins, and you need storage for those content files. Well, in my case, since I don't have a whole lot of storage space, I got the 16 gigs, I was able to move everything onto my 4 terabyte SATA drive. Okay, solid state drive. All right, so let's see here, the MPC one. Now here's the thing, the One Plus, this is where they finally caught up as far as internal storage, right? Because previously the first one only had 4 gigs of internal storage, but you go to the One Plus, really the only thing that's different is it's the same processor, same RAM. It's just more internal storage. Okay. So they went from 4 gigs to 16 gigs. That's what they did differently on the Plus, right? All right, cool. So that's this screen right here. Once again, same processor, right? The only thing that's different is just the memory and the internal storage configurations. All right. The Key 61 and the XSE, those have internal SATA drive bays. So that's something to keep in mind as well, as far as if you're thinking about expandability and stuff like that. MPC the One Plus, no SATA bay and no batteries. The Key 37, no SATA bay, no batteries. Now here's the thing, MPCsamples.com, I believe they have these kits where you can kind of like plug a battery. It's like, you mount it on the outside of the back of the Key 37, and it allows you to be able to power it without having to use a wall wart, if you want to go down that path. But, I digress. All right, let's go to the second gen units, right? So now we're talking about the Live 3s. We're talking about the MPC XL and the MPC Sample, right? So now you're looking at an 8-core. I haven't found any specs in terms of the processing speed of these processors, but they doubled the core, and I suspect that they're roughly about the same speed. It's just they doubled the core, and the internal memory has jumped now to 8 gigs for the Live 3, 16 gigs for the XL, and the internal storage is now 128 gigs for the Live 3, and there's 256 gigs of NVMe on the MPC XL. And when I see NVMe, the first thing I'm thinking is like, that might be user serviceable memory. You might be able to bump that up later on down the line. Okay. They both have SATA bays. Okay. The Live 3 has a battery. Now, here we go with the MPC Sample. All right. I don't have any information about the processor. It's got 2 gigs of RAM. It's got 8 gigs of internal storage plus the micro SD. Okay. Well, guess what? The other drives have micro SDs as well too. Now you also got to keep in mind too, here's the thing that I don't like about like using thumb drives and micro SD. All right. The thing I don't like about them is the speed. Okay. The speed is not going to be as fast as having an internal SATA drive. It's just not. Okay. So when you're thinking about, these new virtual instruments, and they have like a lot of content and samples and stuff that they load up, and then you hear people on YouTube talking about, oh, there's a big lag and da da da. Okay, but where are you storing the content at? Where are those files going to? Because if it's a Key 37, I'm sure the majority of that's going to be on the internal drive, but when you start running out of space, you're going to start thinking about, okay, I need to store these files somewhere, and it's going to be, okay, well, even if it's a USB hard drive or USB, I mean, here's the thing, like on the Live 3, you'll be okay on that one because it's going to be USB-C, and the throughput on that is going to be comparable to the throughput that you would get on like on a SATA drive, excuse me. So that's fine. But like on some of these older machines, like I'm gonna tell you right now, if I was looking at purchasing something on the used market, I would stay away from the MPC one or even the One Plus, right? Because bang for your buck. You're limited on your RAM. I'm sorry, not just your RAM, but your internal storage, and you don't have the expandability of that SATA drive. And even if you were to plug in an external USB drive, the speed getting information in and out of there is not going to be as fast. Okay, and yes, there will be a lag in that case. All right, so with that being the case, that's the technical specs on these guys, right? IO. So let's cover the IO real quick. On the Live and the Live 2, Mark 1, Mark 2, right? They got two USB-A host ports, and as well as a USB-B port, and the USB-B is the one that connects to the computer. That allows you to go into controller mode. All right. Analog inputs, you got 2 ins, 6 outs. All right. So that's going to be the same on the Mark 1 and Mark 2, and as well as the Mark 3. Okay. So that's something that you're looking at. Now, keep in mind on the Live 2, that was when they brought in the CV gates, and all that, those ports, like, so if you use, some of the gear that requires that, that'll be useful. Even if you don't, there's USB adapters that, say if you have the Live, you can just plug in a USB adapter that goes to CV and it'll spit out CV and all that kind of stuff. All right. So let's see. The X and the XSE, right? 4 ins, 8 outs. XL, the new XL, 4 ins, 8 outs. Okay. The Key 61, right? It's going to be the same as the X. It's going to have 4 ins, but it's going to have 8 outs. The 37, 2 ins and 2 outs. That's going to be more similar to the MPC One and the One Plus. Okay. And then let's see here. Lastly, you got the sample. You got these. It's going to have a TRS IO. Okay. So basically, you're going to have 2 ins and 2 outs on that. And for the most part, let's see here. Oh, track counts. Let's talk track counts, right? So on the Gen 1s, right? You can get 8 stereo audio tracks, 128 MIDI tracks, as far as your plugins, your instrument plugins, you're looking at 8 virtual instrument plugins as well. And I'm going to do a video later on to kind of test out how well will my MPC Live Mark 1 perform with these newer plugins, and see if I can get to that 8 plugin count with these newer plugins, because they're using a lot more processing power and memory than like the original plugins that came out. All right. So the Gen 2s, that's when they bumped it up. They doubled the audio tracks, and they went all the way to 32 plug-in instruments. Okay. You're still at 128 MIDI tracks. Who's going to have 128 MIDI tracks? I do not know, but there it is. Okay. MPC Sample. Let's see here. No audio tracks. That's not part of the workflow. Nothing on the MIDI. 16 sounds, sequencer focus, sampler workflow. So yeah, I mean, it's not really, we're not doing a good comparison with the MPC Sample. So I'm not even going to touch on that. And I have not had any experience with it personally. Okay. And the Gen 1s and the Gen 2, they all go into DAW, into controller mode to be in order to be able to control your DAW. So that's that. They all share that, that same quality. Okay. Firmware, they all use the same firmware, which means that internally they all have the same capability. The only thing that might be limiting them is the design of the hardware. So the hardware platform is going to be the only real limiting factor here. So perfect example, my MPC1, because I'm running the, this software, I'm sure it could probably, if I plug in an MPE, device, it's probably going to work, which eventually I will buy one and I will actually test that out, but I'm pretty confident that that will work. Especially since, in poking around in some of the settings, I've seen that MPE option inside of it. Now, let's see here. And I don't, I'm talking about the firmware here. I don't see Akai changing or making something to where it's like, oh, okay, well, you know what? We're no longer going to create firmware that supports these devices because, they're basically running the same processor architecture. Okay. Main thing that's different is going to be the fact that, you got 4 processors on the Gen 1 versus 8 internal processors on, or cores, 8 cores on the new Gen 2s, so, unless they're making the firmware so big in terms of everything they're cramming into it, that's the only thing I can see that might break it. But for right now, I just don't see them stopping. I think that they will continue to support the old hardware for some time. But yeah, in a nutshell, that's pretty much it. As far as this conversation, I hope that this helps somebody. I hope that, that this helps you guys make a well-informed decision in terms of what you want to purchase. And like I said before, look in the description and you will find a link to this, this PowerPoint, so that way you can review it even further. Okay. Outside of that, talk to you guys later. Peace.